A long time ago, before the compass was a needle in a plastic case or a widget on a glowing screen, it was a trembling mystery in ancient China. Nestled in the folds of the Warring States period over 2,000 years ago, there was no such thing as north, not in the way we know it. But there were whispers of a direction that held power. A piece of iron, struck by lightning or stroked against lodestone, began to twitch when suspended on silk thread or floated in water. The ancient Chinese called it the south-pointing needle, because that's what it did, pointed to the south, the warm and living direction, the place of growth and summer and heaven's favor. No one understood why. They didn't need to. It was enough to know that it moved, and in its quiet, unspoken dance, it hinted at a hidden order under heaven. This Sinan, or south-pointing spoon, didn't guide sailors across oceans. It sat in the hands of diviners and geomancers, those who read the breath of the earth, the flow of qi. In the Chinese worldview, the earth was a living thing, pulsing with energy lines that must be aligned for balance and prosperity. The Sinan wasn't a tool for travel, it was a tool for truth. Emperors consulted it before constructing palaces. Farmers used it to pick auspicious days. It was a sacred thing, its slow spin like a whisper from the world beneath our feet. Imagine an old scholar in the court of the Han Dynasty, crouched beside a lacquered table. He watches the spoon turn, recording its direction with care. To him, the needle isn't just turning south, it's aligning with the will of heaven. The south is the seat of the emperor. It is the direction of harmony, the orientation of the cosmos itself. To face south was to face order, to respect the divine arrangement of things. The scholar adjusts his robes and nods. The earth has spoken. Construction may begin. A new city might rise. A marriage may be blessed, all from a twitching needle's nod. Over centuries, something shifted. Mariners on China's foggy rivers and shadowed coasts began to notice the power of this tool. A water-laden bowl with a floating needle could offer guidance even under moonless skies or in blinding mist. Some coastal seafarers began to carry them, not openly, not always confidently. To sail was to risk the wrath of dragons and sea gods. Yet when storms rose and stars vanished, the little needle pointed on slowly. Sailors began to believe that this tiny force might not be demonic or divine, but something deeper, natural, predictable, almost mathematical. Still, they whispered prayers as they floated their bowls, unsure whether they were invoking heaven or defying it. He describes how sailors used a magnetized needle mounted on a pivot to find their way, even in total darkness. It was revolutionary, but not quite triumphant. Even Shen Ku, sharp and scientific, spoke of the compass with reverence. The needle, he noted, constantly points to the south, but with slight deviation. He didn't know why. No one did. And that unknowing him, it all the practical use left a space for awe. The compass, after all, moved without touch. It responded to invisible forces. What could be more magical than that? Qi, the vital force that runs through all things, was thought to spiral through the heavens and earth. The magnetized needle, sensitive and subtle, seemed to attune itself to this flow. Its movement was not mechanical, it was spiritual. It didn't point to a place. It harmonized with one. Taoist texts began to use the compass metaphorically, speaking of wise men who turn like the needle, or settle in stillness as the spoon does. The instrument became not just a divination aid, but a model for inner life, quiet, centered, gently aligned with the truth. There were darker interpretations too. In some quarters, especially in southern China, the compass was feared. Anything that moved without visible cause, that turned of its own accord, might be possessed. Some said the needle responded not to heaven, but to spirits, that it pointed not to south, but to the land of the dead. There are records of people burying compass spoons in graveyards, hoping to trap wandering souls, or to seal tombs against intrusion. A few rural clans forbade their use entirely, fearing they would attract bad fortune or disturb ancestral rest. As the compass spread, it brought not only guidance, but also superstition. From scholars to sailors, mystics to merchants, more and more people began to rely on it. It helped map cities and shape battle plans. It guided river crossings and temple placements. It became a part of life, part of the silent machinery that turned the world. And yet, it never quite lost its strangeness. Even the most seasoned navigator, bowl in hand, would often glance upward before setting out, pat the sky, the clouds, the wind, just in case. Just to be sure that the needle, for all its mystery, hadn't changed its mind. There is something beautiful in that early. It had not yet been measured, dissected, named in full. It trembled, it floated, it pointed, yes, but not just to a direction. It pointed to something larger, a cosmic axis, a breath beneath the earth, a question, a promise, perhaps even a god. Its early users were not just navigators, but interpreters of signs, readers of the invisible. They believed that to follow the compass was not merely to go somewhere, but to go rightly, to move in accordance with the universe, to travel not just through space, but toward harmony. That belief would echo through centuries and civilizations. And though the world would change, and understanding would deepen, the needle would always carry a little of that first trembling with it. These were lodestones, naturally magnetized chunks of mineral that tugged gently at iron, danced faintly on smooth surfaces, and turned ever so slightly when suspended. They were not mined exactly, they were found, unearthed by farmers, shepherds, or wandering mystics who came across them, nestled in the soil like strange eggs laid by the earth itself. And to those who held them in their hands, their pull was more than physical, it was spiritual. Here was a rock that moved without being moved, that acted without force. In a world shaped by the rhythms of the Tao, what could be more sacred? It flowed through everything. The rustle of wind through pine needles, the swirl of ink in a scholar's brush, the twist of a fish through a stream. It was in silence and in thunder. To live rightly was to move with the Tao, not against it. And when the earliest natural philosophers saw the lodestone's invisible pull, they didn't see mere magnetism. They saw resonance, a sign that certain materials could listen to the flow of the universe, could align themselves with the hidden pulse of things. The lodestone, quiet and powerful, became a symbol of inner stillness and outer harmony. It did not command it. Some claimed that lodestones were fragments of the pole star fallen to earth, that they carried within them the order of heaven's rotation. Others believed they were bones of the earth dragon, bones that hummed when touched. In Taoist monasteries, monks pressed lodestones to their foreheads during certain rituals, hoping to realign their thoughts with the way. The sensation, they claimed, was subtle, but real, faint tug, like a thought being drawn home. Court officials and engineers began experimenting with the strange stones. They floated splinters of ironwood on bowls of water, tied to thin needles stroked against the lodestone. Slowly, methodically, they recorded the results. A needle stroked in this direction pointed that way. Another, stroked differently, spun in circles, or refused to settle. The world was giving up secrets, not in thunderclaps, but in tiny, trembling motions. And all the while, the scholars framed their experiments not as challenges to nature, but as conversations with it. They believed they were asking the universe polite questions, and it was replying, softly but surely, through the twitch of iron. But they did believe in Earth's breath-life force. In Taoist thought, the planet was not inert. It had directionality, preference, disposition. Mountains faced certain ways for a reason. Waters curved with intent. The lodestone needle didn't defy this, it obeyed it. To hold a needle that always turned south was not to grasp a mystery, but to see the world made plain. South, in the Chinese cosmological system, was the seat of warmth, light, imperial virtue. To face south was to face civilization, rule, and proper order. The compass did not just show direction, it affirmed moral orientation. Builders, too, began to pay attention. When laying out city walls or palace grounds, geomancers advised on alignment. Temples were constructed not wherever space allowed, but where spiritual currents flowed best. With the aid of magnetic guidance, they mapped dragon veins, energetic lines coursing beneath the soil. These veins determined prosperity or misfortune. To build a gate out of alignment was to risk blocking the dragon's breath. To sleep in the wrong orientation might disturb dreams. The compass thus slid into domestic life not as a scientific tool, but as a guardian of balance. A marriage blessed under proper geomantic direction was thought more likely to be fertile. A grave aligned with the southern flow ensured peace for the dead. In this period, magnetic devices were still rare. They were crafted by hand, often in secrecy, and passed down among the learned. A compass might be wrapped in silk and stored beside scrolls on astrology and medicine. It might be brought out only during eclipse nights or solstice rituals. For many, it remained a curiosity, a marvel, a thing too delicate to fully understand. Some craftsmen fashioned synons with bronze discs etched with cosmological symbols. The needles spun not just across space, but across belief. Every turn was a turning of the heavens. Every still point a moment of alignment between man and cosmos. Meanwhile, maritime travelers along the Yangtze and coastal routes were beginning to hear of these tools. Traders, who had once relied solely on stars and currents, now carried small bowls with iron slivers. They didn't speak of magnetism. They spoke of guidance, of luck, of divine favor in the waves. A compass on a ship was like a priest in a shrine, quiet, watching, reassuring. If the wind died and clouds hid the stars, the needle's dance still whispered a way forward. Some captains offered it rice wine before departure. Others kept it wrapped until desperate. But when it was used, it was with reverence. There is a Chinese poem from the Tang dynasty that speaks of a needle that forgets itself, yet finds the world. That line, like the compass itself, holds layers. The compass became an emblem, not of assertion, but of surrender. It taught its users not to force direction, but to recognize it, to float, to adjust, to wait. That was how you found your path, not by charging forward, but by attending to the quiet signals of the unseen. Thus, in the centuries before it became an emblem of the West's age of discovery, the compass was already revered as a spiritual tool in the East. It was not a blunt pointer, it was a listener, a seer, a kind of oracle that responded not with words, but with slow, elegant motion. And though it would one day be wielded by conquistadors and colonizers, it began as a monk's companion, as a scholar's mystery, as a stone that echoed the stars. In the lodestone's silent turning, the ancient Chinese saw not just where to go, but how to go, with harmony, with humility, with the earth, not against it. And that is the compass's first great gift. Not its ability to lead us to places, but its invitation to move through the world in alignment with something greater than ourselves. In the golden cities of the Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, the air was thick with scholarship. Astrolabes gleamed on wooden tables, scrolls unfurled with geometric precision, and the night sky was charted with an almost obsessive fervor. Among the great tasks of the Islamic Golden Age was locating the Qibla, the sacred direction to Mecca. It was not merely a matter of faith, it was mathematics. 5 times each day, across vast deserts, snow-capped peaks, and foreign lands, the faithful had to turn precisely toward the Kaaba, not roughly, not approximately, precisely. And so, in a world where salvation was entwined with orientation, direction became divine. When the magnetic compass arrived, likely via trade with China, did not land in a vacuum. It entered a world already obsessed with directionality. The earliest Islamic references to the magnetic compass come from the 13th century. Persian and Arab scholars described it in texts not as a novelty, but as a tool worthy of theological and astronomical consideration. The name given to it, Bagdwiya or Kase, referring to a bowl with a floating needle, indicates how it was used. A small piece of iron, magnetized and placed on water, would align itself to a mysterious, fixed direction. For many, it was like watching a miracle in miniature. The earth whispered, and the needle obeyed. 2 scholars trained in the geometric rigor of spherical astronomy. This strange alignment was no superstition. It was a phenomenon that demanded analysis. Yet, for all its utility, the compass in Islamic lands never became merely mechanical. The act of finding direction was saturated with religious meaning. A compass needle that pointed consistently, unwaveringly, became a metaphor for the faithful heart, always turned toward the source, unmoved by distraction. Mosques were built with Qibla walls, determined by astronomical observation, and eventually confirmed by magnetic direction. Prayer rugs were aligned using instruments that combined compass needles with complex sundials. A new kind of instrument appeared: Qibla indicators, devices that married magnetic motion with sacred geography. These weren't just navigation tools, they were acts of devotion made visible. In the great libraries of Cairo and Damascus, scholars debated the nature of this mysterious force. Some argued that magnetism was a terrestrial echo of the heavens that, just as the stars guided travelers by night, so too did the earth itself carry a divine orientation. Others were more cautious, wary of assigning theological significance to unseen powers. Still, no one denied the compass's utility. Pilgrims used it to orient themselves in distant lands. Merchants used it on caravan trails, and sea captains, those braving the Indian Ocean or the Mediterranean, came to rely on it more and more, whispering prayers as they set their courses, not by stars alone, but by the silent dance of iron on water. Islamic engineers began crafting compasses of exquisite beauty. Rather than simple bowls, they created ornate devices: carved brass boxes with inlaid directional markers, inscribed with verses from the Quran. Some were adorned with compass roses, shaped like 8-pointed stars, each arm bearing a poetic name for the winds or the virtues. The needle itself was sometimes shaped like a leaf or a stylized hand, its pointing finger wrapped in calligraphy. These were not crude tools. They were instruments of elegance and piety, capable of guiding both ship and soul. The compass also found a role in celestial navigation. Islamic astronomers, already masters of the astrolabe and quadrant, began to integrate magnetic readings into their calculations. By comparing magnetic north to true celestial north, they began to notice a discrepancy, a declination. This puzzled them. Why would the compass point not directly to the pole star's location, but slightly aside? Some posited that the Earth had its own internal alignment, distinct from the stars. Others speculated that magnetism was affected by local geography, iron deposits in mountains, or mysterious underground currents. The compass, far from closing questions, opened new ones. It became a spark for speculation, for inquiry, for awe. It's easy now to imagine these medieval scholars as mere caretakers of ancient knowledge, but in truth they were innovators. The Islamic world in this era was not passively receiving the compass, it was reinterpreting it, embedding it in its own cosmology. For Christians, later, the compass would become a symbol of God's order. For Muslims of the Golden Age, it was already that a proof of the world's precision, of its alignment with divine will. That a sliver of iron could turn itself unerringly toward a fixed direction was not strange, it was beautiful, it was appropriate, it was how the world should behave. Still, not all responses were uniformly positive. Some conservative scholars worried about over-reliance on instruments. The Prophet Muhammad had prayed without compasses, guided only by the stars and the sun. To depend on devices, some argued, was to forget the natural signs God had placed for humanity. Others worried that compasses might be manipulated, or worse, enchanted. Tales circulated of rogue traders who reversed their needles to mislead rivals, or of sorcerers who bound jinn to the device to ensure favorable winds. The compass, like all powerful tools, sat at the edge of blessing and danger. And yet, it endured. It spread. From coastal Yemen to Andalusian ports, the magnetic compass became a quiet companion of travelers. By the 14th century, it was etched into the daily rituals of sailors, scholars, and seekers. It slipped into manuscripts alongside treatises on algebra and anatomy. It was taught in madrasas and shown in markets. A boy in Fez might spin a compass needle beside his father's prayer mat. A sailor in Basra might consult it before raising his sail. A pilgrim on the road to Mecca might check his path by it before reciting the Fajr prayer. Wherever it went, it turned in its turning, pointed not only toward Mecca, but toward a universe understood through faith and reason alike. So the compass in the Islamic world was never merely navigational, it was cosmological. It bridged the earth and the heavens, the seen and the unseen. It confirmed what the faithful already believed, that the universe was ordered, purposeful, directed, that there was a place to go, and more importantly, a right way to face. In a world where direction was destiny, the compass became not just a tool, but a testimony. The first time the compass entered Christian Europe, it did so quietly, like a whisper in a monastery. There were no drums or proclamations, no grand declarations of discovery. It arrived in port towns, passed hand to hand among merchants who barely understood its workings. It sat in sailors' chests, tucked beside rosaries and fragments of saints' bones. To most, it was simply a curiosity, a needle that turned. Yet, for those steeped in the medieval Christian worldview, even a whisper could sound like the voice of God. Europe, at the time, was not a place that separated nature from the divine. Every leaf had meaning, every star a purpose. And so when a piece of iron twitched on its own accord and pointed in a consistent direction, it was not seen as a mere phenomenon. It was seen as a sign. Monks were often the first to study it. Within the stone walls of abbeys, beneath candlelight, scribes recorded the movement of the needle as they might track the phases of the moon or the position of a comet. These were men trained to see metaphors in everything. The trembling compass needle was no exception. It was likened to the soul-seeking God wavering, but always trying to orient itself. The Latin texts that began to mention the device referred to it as the mariner's needle, or, more poetically, the guiding hand. One chronicle called it manus datha, hand of God. To turn one's ship by its guidance was to place oneself, quite literally, in divine alignment. The earliest surviving European references to the compass appear in the 12th century. Alexander Neckham, a scholar and theologian, wrote of sailors who used a magnetized needle placed on a straw or reed floating in water to find their way across the English Channel. But even Neckham, writing from the cloisters of St. Albans Abbey, couldn't help but see something more than technology in this. He described the compass as a marvel of divine providenza, gift for those lost at sea, a symbol of faith amidst the chaos of the world. In an age where storms were punishment and shipwrecks were moral lessons, a device that pointed unwaveringly north was nothing less than miraculous. The compass quickly became wrapped up in Christian cosmology. Medieval maps were not geographic in our modern sense. They were theological diagrams. Jerusalem sat at the center, East Orient. The direction of Eden and Christ's return was always at the top. And so when the compass needle pointed north, it puzzled some. Why did it not point to paradise? Why north? The direction of darkness and cold, of barbarian lands and pagan fears. Theologians argued over this. Some claimed that north represented the need for penance, that we were being directed not to comfort, but to correction. Others saw it as a call to missionary action. The compass, they said, pointed to where the gospel had not yet reached. In Gothic cathedrals, builders began to take note. Though churches traditionally faced east, the growing knowledge of magnetic orientation allowed for more precise planning. Compass readings were consulted when aligning altars and towers. The idea that stone could be laid in harmony with God's natural order thrilled many architects. The compass became not just a sailor's tool, but a mason's companion. It appeared in carving diagrams, sometimes stylized as a cross within a circle. Some even speculated that the great rose windows of Chartres and Notre Dame were designed using compass roses, not just as drafting guides, but as spiritual symbols, reminders that the divine plan was geometric and knowable. For pilgrims, the compass offered new kinds of reassurance. On the long road to Santiago or Rome, travelers often relied on shrines, stars, and spoken directions. But as compasses became more available, wealthier pilgrims began carrying them as tokens of protection. Some were fashioned into pendants or rings. Others were embedded in crucifixes. In these small, private objects, faith and magnetism fused. A woman walking the hills of France might finger a tiny compass beneath her cloak, not to find her way, but to feel that she was not alone, that God was guiding her, invisibly but surely, like the needle under glass. Still, not all welcomed this tool. There were murmurs of heresy. The Church had long cautioned against hidden forces and invisible influences. What was this strange power that moved metal without touch? Some called it the breath of angels. Others feared it was the whisper of demons. In a sermon delivered in Cologne, a friar warned that instruments which turn without cause might be enchanted. A few inquisitors confiscated compasses from accused sorcerers. The very thing that seemed miraculous also seemed unnatural. And in the medieval mind, the unnatural often bordered on the unholy. Yet even as suspicion simmered, the compass spread. In the hands of fishermen, it guided daily journeys. In the hands of knights, it helped plan crusades. As European ships ventured farther into unfamiliar waters toward Iceland, toward Africa, toward the Levant, the compass became indispensable. With it, sailors no longer needed to rely solely on the stars, which could be hidden by cloud or lost to time. The compass pointed regardless of weather or hour. It was a constant, a stillness at the center of movement. Many began to believe it pointed not to north but to God. Art reflected this change. Illuminated manuscripts began to include images of compasses in allegorical scenes. A needle floating above the sea, with an angel guiding it. A compass rose, drawn in the shape of Christ's crown. The Virgin Mary, holding a compass over a storm-tossed ship. These were not metaphors to be decoded. They were declarations of belief that the world was designed, that direction mattered, that we were not wandering through chaos, but being led. So by the time the compass fully entered Christian Europe's consciousness, it was already more than a device. It had become part of the faith, a symbol of the possibility that even in darkness, even when the stars were hidden, there was a path, that even if you did not know where you were, you could still know how to face. In monasteries and marketplaces, on ships and in sanctuaries, the compass turned, and with it turned the hearts of those who believed that somewhere beyond the horizon was not just land, but meaning. By the late Middle Ages, the compass had become an object of fascination, and it is a needle that moved as if alive, a silent presence on ships and in cloisters, a trembling mystery that refused to be still. Its behavior was consistent, yes, but its source remained invisible. No one could see the force that moved it, and in a world where anything hidden could be either divine or diabolical, such invisibility was dangerous. Among common folk, the compass became wrapped in rumor. Sailors swore it worked better when blessed. Peasants whispered that it spun during storms because spirits were nearby. And in some corners of Europe, priests warned that the needle might not point to safety, but to temptation. For every man who saw God's hand in the compass, there was another who feared it might be the devil's finger. Theologians debated the compass's moral nature. Was it an instrument of providence or presumption? Did it allow man to navigate the world more wisely, or did it tempt him to trespass into regions God had hidden? Augustine had warned centuries earlier about trusting in hidden forces, what he called a quinta. Aquinas, writing later, was more measured, suggesting that natural laws were expressions of God's will, not deviations from it. But even he tread carefully around phenomena that couldn't be explained, and the compass, however useful, defied explanation. It didn't rely on fire, water, wind, or visible motion. It responded to something imperceptible that made it suspicious. Stories spread of sailors who had used the compass to defy divine judgment. One tale told of a ship caught in a relentless fog. The captain, trusting his compass rather than turning back to port, sailed straight into a whirlpool that dragged the vessel to hell. Another told of a monk who had crafted a compass so accurate it could find not only north, But the souls of the damned he was later found dead in his cell, the needle spinning endlessly on his desk. These tales weren't just warnings against arrogance. They reflected a deeper fear, that the compass might be leading humanity, not toward truth, but away from humility. Still, there were those who embraced the compass's mystery. Certain religious orders saw in its constancy a metaphor for divine grace. The Carthusians, known for their silence and contemplation, used the compass in their meditative writings. The needle, they said, was the heart aligned to God, always pulled toward the divine, even when the world turned round it. Some abbots commissioned gilded compasses for their libraries, inscribing the casing with Latin phrases like veritas, magnetic truth, Lord guides. In these circles, the compass was not feared, but sanctified. But outside the monasteries, suspicion lingered. Peasants in rural regions sometimes buried compasses under the foundations of new houses, believing they could repel witches. In one recorded case from the Bavarian Alps, a compass was nailed to a barn door after a birth as a protection against wandering spirits. In the lowlands of Flanders, it was believed that a reversed compass could cause storms. Several fishermen were hanged after being found with such devices. The compass had become a kind of cultural Rorschach, to some, a lifeline, to others. It didn't help that magnetic behavior sometimes appeared erratic. Needles would deviate in certain regions, especially near iron-rich mountains or fields. This declination, though later understood as a natural phenomenon, was terrifying at the time. A compass that changed its mind seemed less like an instrument of order and more like one of deception. Was the devil turning the needle? Was God testing faith? Or was the earth itself alive, offering guidance one moment and falsehood the next? Pilots of merchant ships began to carry more than one compass, checking for consistency like monks comparing gospel translations. Even those who didn't fear the compass outright often treated it with ritual. Some would only use it after reciting a prayer. Others would not let it touch the bare earth, fearing contamination. One Genoese captain reportedly dipped his compass in holy water before long voyages. Another had a crucifix embedded in the compass lid so that the needle would see Christ whenever it turned. Such practices weren't acts of science, they were acts of devotion and defense. The compass was not just a guide, it was a thing that needed watching. As the compass gained prominence in navigation, its role in religious debates deepened. Certain clerics argued that it had been revealed at just the right time after the Fourth Lateran Council. After the Crusades, a divine gift to aid Christian missions. They spoke of how it pointed the way for Christendom to expand, to spread the gospel across seas, to seek the lost sheep of foreign lands. Others, more cautious, reminded their congregations that even the Tower of Babel had begun with noble intentions. The compass might aid pilgrimage or ambition. It might lead to Jerusalem, more to ruin. In a sense, the compass mirrored medieval Europe's own struggle, a continent caught between faith and inquiry, between wonder and suspicion. Every monastery that praised the compass's divine alignment stood opposite a village that feared its whispering needle. Every scholar who studied its behavior fought against tales of witchcraft and demonic winds. And so the compass moved through the medieval world, not as a solved mystery, but as a spiritual mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, and unanswered questions of the age. Its power lay not in what it explained, but in what it left unexplained. Why did it point north? What force moved it? Was it the breath of God, or the pull of something darker? In the absence of certainty, people filled the silence with meaning. and the needle, ever patient, turned quietly on. In the harbors of Genoa and the quiet cloisters of Avignon, a new name began to ripple through Christian Europe's understanding of the seas. Stella Maris, the Star of the Sea. It was the name given to the Virgin Mary in her role as protector of sailors and pilgrims, a luminous guide through darkness and storm. The name was ancient, but its resonance deepened in the age of magnetic navigation. For centuries, mariners had looked up at the northern star Polaris as their fixed point. But as the compass gained prominence, pointing always north, regardless of cloud or fog, many began to believe that it, too, was guided by Mary's hand. The compass needle, some said, was her finger. She who calmed the sea at Cana now pointed the way home. The association grew organically, folding into both liturgy and lore. Sailors in Catholic regions began to dedicate their compasses to Mary, engraving the casing with prayers or painting small icons of her on the lids. Compass roses began to include the letter M at the northern point, marking not just a direction, but a devotion. In one preserved example from Sicily, a 14th century compass lid is etched with the words Ave Maris Stella, a Marian hymn whose title means Hail, Star of the Sea. These gestures were not ornamental, they were acts of trust. The ocean was vast, treacherous, and godless. The compass, with its unseen force and its steady turning, became an intimate shrine. Mary's symbolism merged perfectly with the compass's function. She was purity and intercession, a bridge between the mortal and divine. Likewise, the compass mediated between man and the invisible forces of the earth. It moved mysteriously, yet predictably. It remained calm in chaos. Mary was said to appear to sailors in times of crisis, her cloak stretched over storm-tossed ships, her voice whispering peace into the wind. When the needle quivered before righting itself, some sailors believed she had touched it. It wasn't just a magnetic pull, it was a divine nudge. This belief reached its most poetic expression in the devotional culture of seafaring communities. Shrines to Mary were built into ship hulls, her icons fixed near the helm, often alongside the compass itself. Before departing on long voyages, captains would offer prayers, not just for safe passage, but for the needle's steadiness. Liturgical texts even developed minor rites for blessing the compass, which involved sprinkling it with holy water, invoking Mary's guidance, and reciting verses from the Psalms. The ceremony was half sacrament, half safeguard. No one wanted to sail under a sky where the compass spun aimlessly. In port towns, tales abounded of Mary intervening through the compass. One story from Brittany tells of a vessel lost in a storm, its captain having fallen unconscious from a head wound. The crew, unable to see the stars, turned to the compass only to find it stuck. A cabin boy, in desperation, placed a rosary beside the needle. It suddenly shifted, pointing true. They followed it to landfall, and the boy claimed to have seen a woman walking across the waves as they approached shore. Her veil, he said, was the color of midnight. Such tales were not official doctrine, but they were accepted with reverent enthusiasm. Preachers used them in sermons to remind the faithful of Mary's presence, even in technological marvels. The compass became a symbol of how faith could live in the machinery of the world. It wasn't the abandonment of prayer, it was prayer made tangible. A monk in Barcelona wrote, "The needle turns, and in its turning, prays, for it knows not where it is, but it always knows whom it should face." Art reinforced the connection. In maritime chapels, frescoes showed Mary not just with open arms or a flaming heart, but holding a compass, pointing the way for a tiny ship tossed on painted waves. In manuscript margins, she appears as a compass rose herself, her halo expanding outward in 8 or 16 directions. Poets took up the metaphor eagerly. One troubadour composed a ballad where Mary was both compass and sea, both storm and calm, both star and steel. The intertwining of Mary and the compass also reflected deeper theological shifts. The Middle Ages were a time of uncertainty and wandering, not only in the physical world, but in the spiritual. Heresies brewed, the plague loomed, pilgrimages stretched over months and continents. Amid all this, the figure of Mary became a stabilizing force, compassionate, clear, maternal, and the compass, mysterious yet faithful, was her symbol made small. It gave direction without explanation. It responded without judgment. It waited without demand. Skeptics, of course, existed. Some scholars warned against over-spiritualizing the compass. They insisted it was a natural phenomenon, explainable in time. Others worried that Mary's growing association with tools and devices blurred the line between devotion and idolatry. But these voices were quieted by the daily experience of those who sailed and prayed. To them, the compass was not a distraction from God. It was a reminder of Him, refracted through Mary's gentleness. The sea was terrifying. The compass was steady. So was she. And so, as ships moved deeper into unknown waters, as sailors explored coasts not marked on any chart, they carried with them not only instruments of navigation, but instruments of faith. A needle that turned north. A name whispered into the wind, Stella Maris. In this convergence of metal and mystery, the Virgin's presence extended beyond the altar and into the salt-laden air. The compass did not replace divine guidance. It revealed it. It did not diminish trust in heaven. It proved that heaven had not forgotten the sea. The cathedrals of medieval Europe rose like mountains from the plains vaulted heavens in stone, built not only to honor God, but to echo His order. Their construction required more than faith. It required precision, geometry, and a quiet devotion to balance. And at the heart of many of these designs, though rarely spoken of, lay the compass. Not the mariner's device, but its older cousin, the compass of the mason, the architect's twin-armed tool that drew circles as perfect as any sermon. Yet, as the magnetic compass crept into wider use, a curious convergence occurred. Builders began to notice a resonance between the directional needle and the spiritual geometry they already revered. The circle and the direction were not opposites. They were revelations of the same divine order, one drawn in space, the other pointed by unseen force. In the stone workshops of Chartres and Reims, master builders taught their apprentices that geometry was sacred. Every line, every arch, every vault had meaning. Circles represented perfection, eternity, the unity of the divine. Triangles were the Trinity. Squares stood for the earth. And in drawing these shapes, carefully, reverently with a brass compass, the mason was not merely designing. He was participating in creation. The plan of a cathedral was a prayer in lines and angles, a whisper of Genesis rendered in limestone and light. That the magnetic compass now echoed these themes always, turning to a fixed point, always aligning to a truth beyond sight seemed to many like confirmation. There are records from the late 13th century of builders incorporating magnetic readings into their initial planning phases. Before a cornerstone was laid, a compass might be floated in a bowl to establish orientation. The church must face east, of course toward the rising sun, the resurrection. But true east was not always visible. Clouds, hills, or dense forests could obscure celestial readings. In such cases, builders turned to the magnetic needle. It gave them a consistent baseline from which to measure their angles. Slowly, quietly, the mariner's tool joined the mason's. This blending of tools extended to symbolism. A few surviving floor plans from the 14th century include both geometric shapes and directional markers, north, south, east, west, carefully labeled with compass readings. One manuscript from a French monastic workshop includes a marginal note: Sica, acus, fixat, se ad polum, sic templum, ad lumen, verum. As the needle fixes itself to the pole, so must the temple fix itself to the true light. It's not hard to imagine a master builder standing on a rise of earth before the first stones are laid, consulting both sky and compass, seeking to align the building not only with the terrain, but with heaven. Inside the finished cathedrals, the compass reappeared in subtler forms. The great rose windows, often misunderstood as mere decoration, were geometric masterpieces, fractal-like bursts of circles within circles, often oriented to cardinal directions. The placement of chapels and transepts followed invisible lines that echoed both theological hierarchies and magnetic symmetry. Even the labyrinths laid in tile on cathedral floors, like the famous one at Chartres, have been influenced by directional awareness. Some scholars speculate that walking these paths aligned the pilgrim not just spiritually, but magnetically, grounding them in a balance of earth and sky. For the Masons themselves, the compass held an initiatory significance. In the emerging guild traditions that would later evolve into speculative Freemasonry, the compass and square were central symbols. The compass represented spirit, the arc of heaven, the unseen principle that governed the form. The square represented matter, the grounding of that principle in earthly structure. Together, they mirrored the compass needle's alignment to the polar mystery, unseen, ungraspable, yet unfailing. In this way, the builders saw themselves not only as craftsmen, but as participants in a cosmic drama, one in which direction, form, and devotion all sang the same note. Tales arose of miraculous compass readings during construction. One story from Bruges tells of a builder whose compass spun wildly each time he tried to lay a new apse. After days of confusion, he reportedly prayed to the Virgin for guidance. That night, he dreamed of a woman walking through the site, laying her hand on the foundation stones. The next morning, the compass calmed, the apse was laid. Years later, a chapel to Mary was erected on that very spot. Whether true or not, such stories reveal the reverence with which direction was treated. The compass was not just a guide, it was a witness. Not all saw it as benign. As the compass entered the sacred space of cathedral design, some clergy grew uneasy. They feared that reliance on tools might replace reliance on God. One bishop reportedly forbade the use of magnetic instruments in his diocese, declaring that no needle shall turn where the Holy Spirit guides. But his protest was largely ignored. The builders continued. They had seen what the compass revealed. They had felt its silent certainty, its unwavering finger pointing beyond doubt. It did not replace faith, it affirmed it. So the compass entered the cathedral, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. It sat beside the plumb line and the chisel, another tool in the sacred act of making. And in the hands of those who shaped Europe's stone prayers, it became something more than functional. It became symbolic. It whispered of a world that was not random, but ordered, that the heavens had a pattern, that the earth responded, that in the turning of a needle and the curve of an arch, one might glimpse the invisible architecture of the divine. Pilgrimage in medieval Europe was a movement of body and soul. The faithful walked for months, even years, through forests and deserts, across mountains and seas, toward relics and shrines said to shimmer with grace. Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, Rome, Jerusalem, each a radiant point on the spiritual map. But the roads were treacherous, and the stars were often hidden. As the centuries turned and the compass quietly entered Christian life, it found an unexpected role, not just as a mariner's tool or a mason's guide, but as a companion of the pilgrim. The compass, delicate and steady, began to walk with the faithful, a silent presence in satchels and sandals, pointing not merely toward a place, but toward purpose. These were not large devices. Portable compasses were crafted with care palm-sized bowls, with painted lids, needles mounted in brass, delicate thread suspensions that floated in leather flasks. For the wealthier, they were ornate, carved from ivory, or adorned with symbols of the journey. One example, preserved in a reliquary in Toledo, bears an engraving of St. James the Greater, patron of pilgrims, with a scallop shell halo and a compass rose at his feet. Such artifacts were not sold in shops, but given as gifts or handed down through families. To carry a compass was to carry a blessing. It began quietly. A knight on pilgrimage to Jerusalem brought back tales of Saracen sailors who used floating needles to cross the Mediterranean. A Franciscan friar, returning from the Holy Land, wrote of Eastern Christians who oriented their prayers with a small device that moved without wind. Soon, European pilgrims began to imitate the practice. Not all carried compasses. Many relied on memory, sun, and road markers. But for those traveling alone or across uncertain paths, the compass became a trusted friend. It pointed not only the way forward, but the way back. The compass's religious overtones deepened with each mile. Some saw it as a divine interlocutor, material object that responded to unseen forces, much like relics or saints' bones. Before crossing a river or choosing between two paths, a pilgrim might float the compass in water and wait. If the needle pointed consistently toward their intended direction, they would proceed. If it hesitated or spun, they might wait, pray, or turn back. These decisions were not superstition, they were conversation. The needle was asked, and it answered. Shrines along major routes began to accommodate the device. In some hostels, compasses were kept on altars for communal use. A traveler could consult it before setting out in the morning, alongside morning prayer. A few particularly famous relics, such as the cloak of St. Martin or the sandals of St. Roch, were said to steady the needle when it wavered. Whether this was physical or spiritual, no one could say, but pilgrims believed it, and belief gave strength. In the songs and poems of the road, the compass appeared as a symbol of inner guidance. Troubadours sang of hearts that tremble like the needle of love that points ever true. A Catalan verse from the early 15th century speaks of a woman awaiting her lover's return. His compass rests beside my bed, still pointing north, still full of hope. These were not technical descriptions, they were metaphors. The compass became the heart that longs, the soul that seeks, the faith that does not waver, even when the world turns. There were darker uses, too. Some pilgrims believed the compass could detect danger, that it would behave strangely near sites of sin or heresy. Rumors swirled of a ruined abbey in Burgundy, where compasses would spin until one left the grounds. In the Black Forest, A fork in the road was said to curse compasses every needle turned south, no matter the path. In such places, travelers clutched their devices tightly, whispering prayers and hastening their pace. Whether real or imagined, the compass became a mirror of fear as well as faith. Merchants soon followed the pilgrims' lead. As trade routes expanded and more people took to the roads, compasses were adopted as tools of both navigation and negotiation. A merchant might present his compass at a meeting as proof of honesty. Ideal in straight paths, he might say, laying it gently on the table. In this way, the compass moved from pouch to proverb. To walk without one was to wander. To follow it was to walk in truth. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the compass had become common among certain classes of traveler. It was still rare, still expensive, but its presence was no longer exotic. Pilgrims took it for granted the way they took for granted their scallop shells or walking staffs, and yet it had not become mundane. Its mystery endured. The way it turned without touch, the way it aligned itself to a force no eye could see, the way it seemed to respond to longing itself. For the medieval pilgrim, the journey was never merely geographic. It was symbolic, penitential, transformative. Every step was an act of worship, every obstacle a test. And in this landscape of meaning, the compass did not replace divine guidance. It made it visible. It did not point to the shrine alone. It pointed to the why, to the belief that there was a right way to go, that even in a world of confusing roads, there existed a direction blessed by grace. The compass, like the pilgrim's own heart, trembled but always turned home. The Knights Templar rode beneath red crosses and white cloaks, their banners snapping in desert winds, their swords drawn for both war and worship. They were warrior monks, guardians of pilgrims, keepers of secrets. And among the many symbols whispered about in their legends grails, lost relics, hidden codes, another appeared quietly, like a shadow behind the sun, the compass. Not always mentioned by name, not always recognized for what it was, but present nonetheless. In the lore that swirled around their journeys, the compass became part of the story, a silent witness to their missions, a hidden guide through hostile lands. It was said they had learned of it in the East, that they had carried it home like a relic, that it pointed not only north, but toward God's will. The idea was not new. The compass had already found its place in Christian Europe, wrapped in reverence and suspicion. But the Templars gave it an edge. They were men of action, tasked with guiding pilgrims through dangerous routes, planning fortifications, navigating battlefields. To them, direction was not theoretical, it was a matter of life and death. And so when the floating needle found its way into their hands, they saw its value immediately. A tool that worked when the stars could not be seen, that whispered true even in unfamiliar lands, was a weapon as much as a wonder. Some chroniclers even claimed the Templars were among the first Europeans to use the compass at sea piloting their galleys, with instruments learned from Arabic seafarers along the Levantin coast. In the Templar commanderies of southern France and northern Spain, stone carvings hint at geometric obsessions, circles, interlaced arcs, symbols that some say represent early compass roses. One chapel in Aragon features a stained glass window with a knight kneeling before a starburst, pattern 8 points, each marked with a tiny letter. Was it just a wind rose, or something more? The order's emphasis on secrecy, on layered meaning, makes certainty impossible, but the patterns persist. And in Templar maps, sketched on vellum, weather-worn and fragmentary, there are marks that do not correspond to stars or known geography. Some believe they represent magnetic lines of force. Others say they are allegorical. But the compass, in symbol, if not in form, haunts the margins. There are stories, of course. Many are apocryphal. One tells of a Templar knight captured in the Holy Land, who escaped by traveling only at night, following a needle he had magnetized with a strange black stone. Another speaks of a group of knights who buried a compass in a sealed casket beneath the chapel floor, inscribed with the Latin phrase, Et Deus dirigit, and God guides. These tales cannot be verified, but they endure. In whispered conversations, in cryptic manuscripts, in the half-lit corners of medieval memory, the compass and the Templars remain linked. Part of this is because of what the compass represented. It was not just a pointer, it was a mystery. And the Templars were drawn to mystery like iron to lodestone. They were accused, after all, of heresy, not because they sinned openly, but because they practiced in silence. Their rituals were secret. Their beliefs, many said, strayed too close to the mystical. If they used the compass, it was not merely for travel, it was for understanding. Some speculated they used it in spiritual exercises, turning toward it like Muslims turned toward Mecca. Others imagined them using it in rituals, circles drawn, needles spun, prayers whispered as the needle settled. When the Templars fell betrayed, tortured, and disbanded by the French king, the rumors only deepened. Some claimed their compasses had vanished with them, that in the ashes of Templar strongholds, strange magnetic stones were found, arranged in ritual patterns. Others spoke of surviving knights who fled to Scotland, bringing their devices with them, hiding them in chapels and caves. The compass became part of the mythos, another relic among the grails and scrolls and treasures never found. What makes these stories endure is not their verifiability, but their resonance. The Templars were seekers, and the compass is, above all else, a seeker's tool. It does not explain, it does not judge, it points. And in its pointing, it suggests that there is a true direction even when all paths seem equal. Even when the night is full of fear, for a knight whose life was a blend of faith and violence, obedience and doubt, the compass offered something rare, silent certainty. In the centuries that followed, other orders adopted the compass, the Hospitallers, but none would carry the same shadowed romance as the Templars. In their lost chapels, in their broken seals, the compass remained half symbol, half secret, not just a tool for navigation, but a whisper of alignment, a gesture toward a larger plan. Perhaps that is why the compass became such a powerful image in later legends of the Templars, because it offered what they sought, a direction through the unknown, a way forward when maps ended, a proof that the world, however cruel, was still guided by something invisible and true. The needle did not waver. Even as kingdoms fell and fires burned, it turned quietly, unafraid. And perhaps, in that unwavering motion, the Templars saw a reflection of their own vow to be faithful, to be firm, to go forward into darkness, with only a cross on their chest-stand, a compass in their hand. Dante Alighieri wrote his Divine Comedy not merely as a journey through the afterlife, but as a map of the moral universe, a geography of sin, purgation, and salvation. Each realm had its architecture, its logic, its direction. One descended into hell by spiraling circles. One climbed Mount Purgatory in rising terraces. One moved through heaven by ascending crystalline spheres. But through all these motions, what Dante never ceased doing was orienting, was always seeking the right direction toward God, toward truth, toward the stars. Award truth, toward the stars. It is no coincidence that the final word of the Paradiso, and of the comedy itself, is stars. For Dante, and for many of his readers, salvation was a matter of celestial alignment. The compass does not appear explicitly in the Divine Comedy, but its spirit is everywhere. Dante, who was both poet and philosopher, wrote during the early 14th century, a time when magnetic compasses were already used by sailors and increasingly known to scholars. Though he never described a needle floating in water or a mariner consulting a dial, he was acutely aware of direction as more than geography. In the Inferno, travelers are disoriented, descending away from light and order. In Purgatorio, orientation begins to return. The sun rises, stars appear, paths are climbed. And in Paradiso, movement becomes pure alignment, a turning of the soul toward the unmoved mover. Several passages suggest a consciousness of the compass's symbolic power. In Inferno, Dante describes how the direction of gravity itself changes as he and Virgil pass through the center of the earth. They are flipped, reoriented. We climbed back up, he writes, to see once more the stars. The implication is profound. Sin is a distortion of direction. Salvation, its restoration. To sin is to lose the way. To be saved is to face true north. Scholars in Dante's time were fascinated by how the compass always pointed toward a specific polean, invisible axis in the heavens. This aligned well with medieval cosmology, which saw the universe as structured, layered, and purposeful. The earth, though imperfect, was part of a grand design. The compass, with its unchanging orientation, seemed to confirm this. It was not simply a tool for finding one's way across the sea. It was a sign that the world itself had a direction, and that human souls, like ships, could steer either true or astray. Dante's references to the heavenly wheels, the fixed stars, and the Empyrean reflect this mindset. In the Paradiso, the souls of the blessed orbit around God, as though drawn by a divine magnetism. They do not struggle to move, they are pulled. Their joy is alignment, their flight is obedience. One could easily imagine the compass needle as a metaphor for the soul in this framework, restless until it finds its axis, trembling until it points home. Later commentators on Dante began to draw this comparison explicitly. In marginalia and glosses, readers added compass roses beside key passages. One Italian scholar in the 15th century noted that the poet turns as the needle turns as the needle, turns always seeking the polar star of truth. Artists, too, picked up the theme. Illuminations of Dante's journey sometimes placed a compass in the margin, often held by an angel or floating above the globe. In one manuscript, Virgil is shown holding a compass as he guides Dante through the circles of Helnot to find a path, but to indicate that even in descent, direction matters. Dante's own exile from Florence likely intensified his sensitivity to orientation. Cast out from his city, wandering from court to court, he was literally and spiritually adrift. The comedy is, in part, a desperate map back to meaning. And though the poet would not have carried a physical compass, the structure of his journey suggests he carried a metaphysical one. Each decision, each turn, each upward climb was measured not by distance, but by moral bearing. He sought not merely to arrive, but to arrive rightly. The metaphor extended into political philosophy. In his treatise De Monarchia, Dante argued for a universal ruler not to dominate, but to align. Just as a compass needle aligns with the earth's hidden force, so should human authority align with divine justice. Disorder, he claimed, came from misalignment, peace from orientation. The compass thus became a political image, as well as symbol of governance, of leadership that did not command but guided. In sermons inspired by Dante's work, priests spoke of the compass as the soul's conscience. The heart of man, one preacher said, is a needle, and sin is the mountain that bends it away from truth. Another declared that the compass proved God's mercy, that even when lost, we are never without direction. Such language became common in homiletic literature, blending science and spirit, observation and faith. What makes Dante's legacy so enduring is not just his poetry, but his insistence that the universe is navigable, that it is possible to move through suffering, through confusion, through exile, and still reach the stars. The compass, in this vision, is not a crutch, but a covenant, a quiet promise that there is a center, that there is a pull, that even in the darkest wood, as he writes at the very beginning of the Inferno, one may yet find a straight way lost. And so, long after Dante's death, as the compass became more common in ships and cities, it carried a residue of his vision. Every turning needle was a line of verse, every stable direction a theology. Whether he intended it or not, the poet helped enshrine the compass as more than a tool. He made it a symbol of hope, of order, of the slow, trembling journey back to grace. In dimly lit chambers, lined with copper stills and stained parchment, the alchemists of late medieval Europe labored at the edge of the known world, part chemist, part mystic, part poet. They sought gold, yes, and immortality, and the philosopher's stone, but they also sought understanding. To them, the universe was a dance of correspondences, a web of symbols hidden in matter. Fire reflected spirit, salt carried memory, mercury whispered of change. And when the magnetic compass entered their laboratories, not as a sailor's tool, but as a curiosity, was quickly absorbed into their symbolic universe. The needle's trembling became a sign, its unerring direction, a riddle. Alchemists did not simply use the compass, they interpreted it. In the Hermetic tradition, everything pointed to something else. The sun pointed to gold, the moon to silver, the eagle to ascension, and the compass needle, endlessly seeking but never arriving, was read as the soul's longing. It moved without being touched. It responded to something invisible. It was the microcosm, trembling before the macrocosm. The needle, wrote one anonymous alchemist in a 15th century codex, knows not its master, but follows him always. For alchemists steeped in metaphor, this was more than magnetic alignment, it was mystical obedience. Some tried to map the compass onto planetary forces. Saturn, they believed, ruled the slow and steady pull of the needle. Venus explained its delicate hesitation. Others speculated that the compass responded to subterranean flows, veins of metallic spirit that pulsed beneath the earth, drawing the needle like a lodestone draws iron. In this view, the compass did not merely point north, it pointed to the heart of the world, to the axis mundi, the world pillar, the secret channel between above and below. To follow it was to walk the path of Hermes himself. In the illustrations of alchemical manuscripts, the compass often appears as an emblem tucked into corners, a circular diagram with intersecting lines, a needle balanced on the hand of a robed figure. In one German text, the needle is depicted hovering over a human skull, with a caption reading, "Truth is drawn to death, as the soul to its origin." In another, a compass floats above the four classical elements, its tip resting on ether. These were not technical drawings, they were symbolic blueprints. To the alchemist, the compass was an initiatory device, revealing the presence of unseen laws. Some even experimented with the compass in practice. They magnetized needles, using stones taken from tombs, believing death lent them greater sensitivity. They suspended them above crucibles, hoping the changing alignment might indicate the proper moment to add sulfur or quicksilver. One alchemist claimed that during a lunar eclipse, the compass reversed direction a sign. He said that heaven's gates had opened. These were not repeatable experiments. They were rituals. The laboratory was a chapel. The needle was a prayer. Of particular fascination was the way the compass resisted reversal. No matter how one turned the casing, the needle swung back. This was interpreted as a sign of moral constancy, of spiritual gravity. The soul, though led astray, returns to its source. Some alchemists crafted compasses with two needles, one pointing north, the other to a chosen symbol, a sun, a stone, a letter. They used the space between the needles as a measure of alignment. When the two matched, the time was right. For what? They did not always say transmutation, illumination, revelation. The compass also intersected with the concept of the anima mundi, the world soul. In alchemical cosmology, all things are alive and interconnected. Stones remember, metals grow, directions carry personality. North was often associated with the cold, the hidden, the wise. South with the warm and impulsive. East with beginnings, west with endings. The compass thus became a map, not only of space, but of psyche. To face north in meditation was to turn toward introspection. To follow the compass on a journey was to enact an inner pilgrimage. One alchemist wrote, "He who walks the line of the needle walks the line of his own becoming." Mystics outside the alchemical tradition took note as well. The Rosicrucians, emerging in the early 17th century, but drawing from older roots, incorporated compass imagery into their secret texts. Their manifestos speak of an invisible college that lies always to the north, not on any map, but in the heart of the wise. Compass roses appeared in their emblems, often with the letters RC at the center. To be oriented, for them, was not to be geographically correct. It was to be spiritually awake. Yet, for all their reverence, alchemists were never entirely comfortable with the compass. It was too precise, too stubborn. It could not be coaxed or deceived. It obeyed no astrological hour, no charm or incantation. It turned as it willed, or rather as the world willed. Some feared this made it a rival to the more fluid instruments of divination. Others suspected it revealed too much too easily. The compass, one warned, gives answers without initiation. But still they used it. Still they wondered. Still they wrote poems to it, called it Servus Fidelista, faithful servant. And so, in the alchemist's world of symbols and transformations, the compass endured, not just as a navigational tool, but as a reminder that the world is ordered, that forces unseen are no less real, that movement without touch, direction without destination, may yet be the truest form of guidance. The compass did not promise gold. It did not promise eternal life. It offered something subtler and perhaps more profound. The quiet assurance that even in the darkest laboratory there is a direction, that even amid the smoke of alchemy and the silence of lead, a needle still turns toward something, toward everything. Among the letters of kings and the ledgers of merchants, a different kind of correspondence moved silently across medieval Europe. Love letters, inked with trembling hands, scented with pressed herbs, sealed with wax. They carried more than words. They carried longing. And within this deeply human practice, the compass found yet another life knot in the hands of navigators or monks, but of lovers. By the late 15th century, small compasses began appearing as tokens of affection, gifts exchanged between sweethearts, parted by distance, war, or duty. A compass was not just a guide through the world, it was a symbol of fidelity, of the heart's unwavering pull toward another. In an age of arranged marriages and uncertain roads, it whispered the quiet hope that love could still find its way. One of the earliest surviving examples is a letter from a young noblewoman in the Low Countries to her betrothed, serving abroad as a page. Enclosed with her parchment is a delicate needle mounted in a walnut shell, inscribed with the Latin phrase ut semper ad te, as ever, toward you. The needle, she writes, does not know your name, but turns, as I do, by instinct. This was not scientific commentary, it was poetry. The compass had become a metaphor for constancy, for desire that could not be misled by time or terrain. In taverns and salons, such tokens were sometimes referred to as hearts of iron, for their strength and their simplicity. Art of the period embraced the image. In illuminated margins, lovers are drawn, exchanging miniature compasses like rings. In tapestries, a lady holds a compass while a knight departs on horseback, his back to the horizon, her gaze locked not on him, but on the needle. The direction he rides matters less than the fact that her heart still points his way. These images proliferated as the compass became more widespread, its presence no longer confined to ships and altars, but found on dressing tables and inside lockets. For letter writers, the compass offered rich metaphor. "You are my true north" appears in several variations across different languages. "Without you, I turn in circles. My compass spins when you are silent. You are the pole that draws my soul." These were not, they were confessions. In the subtle shifts of a needle, lovers saw their own vulnerability, the way affection can tremble, can be pulled invisibly, can right itself after storms. And in the compass's constancy, they saw hope. Some began to integrate the compass into rituals. Lovers separated by war or pilgrimage would agree to consult their compasses at the same hour each day, believing the shared act would bridge the distance. Others wrote letters describing the position of the needle as an emotional diary. "Today it pointed true," one woman wrote. "I think you must have smiled." Whether these readings were real or imagined mattered little. The compass had become a mirror of the heart. In courts where affairs of love were dangerous or forbidden, the compass served as code. A needle sent turning southward meant sorrow. One reversed and fixed with wax signaled an end. In Florence, there is record of a love affair discovered through a servant's confession. He had been tasked with adjusting the needle of a mistress's compass nightly, according to the movements of her lover. In this delicate theater of romance and secrecy, the compass played its part with quiet elegance. The troubadours, ever eager for symbols, sang of the iron heart that never strays, of the needle that waits while I wander. One especially popular ballad told of a sailor who left his beloved with only a compass and a promise: "Follow its point, and I shall find you." When he returned, years later, he found her still waiting, the compass's casing worn smooth by her hands. Whether true or legend, the story became a staple of wedding toasts and fireside tales. Not all compass tales ended sweetly. One tragic account tells of a merchant who gave his wife a compass before departing on a long journey. When she learned he had died at sea, she buried the compass with him. Years later, when the grave was opened during renovations, the needle was found still pointing, rusted but resolute. Some said it was a sign of eternal love. Others said it proved the soul never stops seeking. These stories reveal the compass as more than a tool. They show it as an emotional anchor. In a time when letters could take weeks to arrive, when roads were unsafe, and love was so often uncertain, the compass offered a kind of companionship. It didn't speak, it didn't promise, but it turned gently, steadily, as if remembering something, as if listening for a name. And so, amid the grand narratives of religion and exploration, the compass quietly entered the most intimate human drama of all. It became a gift, a vow, a metaphor. It asked no questions, offered no answers, but pointed always to something felt more than known. In this way, the compass became not just an instrument of navigation, but a keeper of love stories, carried in pockets, hidden in drawers, whispered about in poems, a needle in a box, turning still. As the Renaissance dawned and curiosity bloomed into ambition, collectors across Europe turned their homes into miniature museums of the world chambers of wonder, known as Wunderkammern. In these cabinets of curiosity, one might find a narwhal tusk labeled as a unicorn horn, a taxidermied crocodile suspended from a ceiling beam, and beside them, nestled between antique astrolabes and fragmented idols, a compass. But this compass was not always regarded merely as a navigational device. For many collectors, it was something more, a relic of mystery, a token of divine precision, and a talisman of personal revelation. The compass, in its silence and its motion, had become collectible, not only for its craftsmanship, but for the awe it inspired. Nobles and scholars vied to own rare versions. There were compass casings inlaid with lapis, lazuli, and mother-of-pearl, needlepoints shaped like daggers or angels' wings, and lids etched with Latin mottos such as Veritas, Sola Dirigit, only truth guides. One collection, housed in the castle of a Bohemian prince, boasted a compass suspended in a crystal orb, the needle floating as if trapped in time. Visitors whispered of how it spun when certain relics were brought near, or how it once stopped completely during an eclipse. The stories were often embellished, but the fascination was real. To own a compass was to possess a fragment of the unseen. Some collectors were more scientific in temperament. Renaissance polymaths saw the compass as a hinge between medieval superstition and modern inquiry. They displayed it alongside instruments of measurement quadrants, sextants, thermoscopes, as proof that the world could be known, charted, mastered. And yet, even among these rational minds, a reverent hush often fell when the compass was demonstrated. The needle's steady swing, its quiet refusal to be still until properly aligned, seemed almost performative. It was as if nature itself had agreed to reveal a secret, and the compass was its actor. Inventories from this period often list compasses with surprising language. A 1523 catalogue from a Florentine collector refers to one piece as a device which orients the soul. Another from Nuremberg describes a compass that favors the true path over the easy one. These weren't metaphors tucked into poetry. They were in the official records, used to describe physical objects. Even amid rising empirical method, the compass retained its air of sanctity. Religious figures took notice. A few particularly ornate compasses were gifted to bishops or displayed in monastic libraries. One was said to have belonged to Saint Teresa of Avila, who reportedly kept it beside her writing desk and once wrote, "It moves as God moves me, by causes I cannot see." Whether the story is true hardly matters. The image endured. Artists painted her with quill in one hand and compass in the other, a saint of direction, suspended between mysticism and clarity. Travelers, too, began to carry compasses, not just for guidance, but for memory. A pilgrim returning from the Holy Land might place his compass in a reliquary, as if it had partaken in the journey's holiness. A scholar visiting the court of Suleiman the Magnificent might return with an Ottoman compass etched with Quranic verses, a gift as sacred as it was exotic. In such contexts, the compass functioned not just as a record of where one had gone, but of why. The compass also became an item of inheritance. Families passed them down through generations, embedding them with personal meaning. A father's compass, used to cross the Alps during a winter campaign, became a son's companion on a voyage to the Indies. In the margins of family Bibles, notes were made not only about births and deaths, but about journeys taken by the needle's blessing. Some compasses were buried with their owners, nestled among rosaries and wedding rings. And as the age of exploration began to stir, the compass took on a more public role. It appeared in emblems and coats of arms, sometimes as a subtle nod to knowledge, sometimes as a bold claim of divine favor. One trading company declared in its motto, "We go where the needle points, and God wills." Another depicted a hand grasping a compass over the sea, suggesting mastery over both nature and providence. In such images, the compass was more than a navigational aid, it was a moral compass, a banner of intent. Yet for all its visibility, the compass never lost its intimacy. It remained something to be held, turned, pondered. In salons and workshops, men and women alike would place it on a table and watch the needle drift, settle, and still. In a world growing louder with discovery and conflict, that small moment of alignment carried quiet power. It reminded them that even as maps expanded and stars were named, some forces moved without fanfare, that some truths still arrived not with thunder, but with the gentle twitch of iron on air. And so, in drawers lined with velvet, in cabinets behind glass, in pockets and prayers, the compass waited. It was at once a collectible and a confession, an object of beauty and belief. It asked nothing. It offered no destination. It simply turned in. That turning offered a silent testament. The world has a pattern. You are not lost. Look again. The way has always been there. The winds of empire were rising. Across Europe, sails were unfurling, hulls creaking, and compasses pressed into palms like commandments. The age of discovery had begun, and with it, the compass emerged from quiet corners and entered the machinery of conquest. No longer a scholar's curiosity or a pilgrim's companion, it became an instrument of imperial destiny. With the compass, ships left behind the coasts and ventured into open ocean. With it, kingdoms found new lands to claim, souls to convert, gold to seize. And yet, beneath the brass casings and lacquered lids, the compass still held its quiet mystery. To many who used it, it did not just point north, it pointed toward providence. In Portugal and Spain, the compass was swiftly entwined with religious rhetoric. Explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus carried it not only as a means of navigation, but as proof of divine guidance. Chronicles of their voyages describe the compass as a gift from heaven, God's eye upon the waters, and the needle that knows the hand of the Lord. The open sea, was a terra featureless, vast, and often windless. The compass provided not just orientation, but reassurance. When clouds swallowed the stars, when the sun vanished for days, the needle remained. It was silent, steady, obedient, a miracle that could be held. Sermons echoed this sentiment. Priests blessed compasses before voyages. Monasteries gave them as gifts to departing captains. The Jesuits, in particular, saw the compass as symbolic of their mission movement, guided by divine force. They used it in catechism lessons, teaching that just as the needle pointed to the pole, so must the soul point to God. In one manuscript from Lisbon, a preacher describes the compass as the soul's tutor on the sea, its motion a lesson in humility and constancy. And when new lands were reached, the compass often played a ceremonial role, held high as the first cross was planted, turned slowly to mark the claiming of direction in the name of faith and crown. But not everyone saw the compass as a blessing. Among indigenous peoples encountered by the explorers, the device often stirred fear or fascination. In the Caribbean, early accounts describe islanders who believed the needle contained a spirit. In West Africa, the compass was sometimes mistaken for a relic of ancestral magic. In the Americas, some communities saw it as an omenets, spinning a sign of imbalance or encroaching doom. And indeed, it often was. The compass enabled ships to return, again and again, bringing not just trade, but weapons, disease, and domination. The needle, so small and quiet, became a harbinger of enormous change. In the courts of Europe, the compass was elevated as a symbol of power. It appeared in royal seals, on naval banners, even in architectural motifs. The Spanish Habsburgs favored imagery of globes, encircled by compass roses. In England, the compass was invoked in speeches about expansion and divine mandate. Queen Elizabeth's advisors called England the star-following nation, guided not by force alone, but by divine geometry. Maps from this era began to feature compass roses as decorative centerpieces, embellished with crowns, crosses, and rays of sunlight emanating like halos. Yet, even as it was pressed into service for conquest, the compass retained its ambiguity. Sailors continued to treat it with reverence, sometimes even suspicion. They tapped its casing gently before reading it. They avoided pointing at it too often, fearing it might lose its truth. Superstitions blossomed: needles that spun before storms, compasses that refused to work on cursed ships, lodestones that lost their power when touched by women. These beliefs coexisted with practical reliance. The compass was a miracle, but a fickle one, and not to be mocked. Some captains began commissioning custom compasses, decorated not with scientific markings, but with saints, relics, and invocations. One famous example, belonging to a Portuguese admiral, had a casing carved with the Passion of Christ. The needle turned above the wounds of the Savior, always pointing north, always aligning suffering with salvation. Another, used by a Jesuit navigator on a mission to Japan, bore an image of the Sacred Heart and the inscription, Ego sum via, I am the way. Meanwhile, theologians wrestled with the implications of this new mobility. If God had hidden Eden from man, was it blasphemy to use the compass to seek it? If the gospel was meant to spread by faith, not force, what role did this tool play in conquest? Some argued that the compass was a divine equalizer, allowing Christian sailors to match the knowledge of Muslim and Chinese navigators, fulfilling a kind of prophetic reversal. Others saw it as a test. Would men, now capable of crossing any sea, use this power for salvation or sin. The tension only grew as exploration continued. Compasses were carried into the Arctic, the Indian Ocean, the rivers of South America. Missionaries relied on them to find isolated villages. Conquistadors used them to pursue gold deep into unfamiliar jungles. Slavers used them to chart and perfect the Atlantic Triangle. The same device that guided saints also guided atrocities. The compass, impartial and impassive, bore witness to it all. And yet, in quiet moments, its mystery endured. A sailor alone on deck, peering at the needle by lamplight. A priest in a rocking cabin, using it to find east for morning prayer. A scribe back in Europe, copying maps and noting how the compass line never wavers. It still turned, it still pointed. In all the chaos of expansion and empire, it remained the same faithful, mechanical, inexplicable. In this way, the compass came to embody the paradox of the age, a symbol of divine order used in pursuit of earthly ambition, a tool of truth twisted into conquest, a small, spinning needle at the center of the world's great turning. It asked no questions, it issued no judgments, but in its turning, it forced others to decide which way to go and why. In the echoing lecture halls of European universities, where parchment rustled and minds began to crack the bones of nature, the compass was finally laid bare. The Enlightenment had arrived. The age of wonder gave way to the age of reason, and mystery itself became suspect. What once moved by invisible force was now to be explained by mathematics, demystified by experiment, catalogued and named. Lodestones were dissected, needles were tested in vacuum chambers, and the earth itself was proposed to be a giant magnet. The compass whence the whisper of angels, the pull of Mary, the metaphor of love became a phenomenon, a case study, a problem to be solved. It was William Gilbert, physician to Queen Elizabeth I, who dealt the decisive blow. In 1600, he published De Magnet, a treatise that examined magnetism with unprecedented rigor. In it, he declared that the earth itself was a vast magnetic body, and that the compass needle aligned with its magnetic field, not with some divine or celestial influence. It was a revolutionary idea, one that took the sacred mystery and pinned it down like a specimen on a board. To many, it was liberation. At last, the riddle of the compass had an answer. No more saints, no more stars, just physics. Gilbert's work was foundational, but it did not end the compass's cultural journey. It transformed it. Now it became an emblem of the rational mind, the cool, calculating force of Enlightenment inquiry. Scientists carried compasses on expeditions, not as talismans, but as instruments, tools of precision used to measure declinations, to chart unseen forces, to draw invisible lines across the globe. The compass helped determine longitude. It played a role in mapping the magnetic poles. It helped explorers sketch the skeleton of the world. And yet, even in this new light, the compass retained something of its earlier aura, because even when explained, it remained mysterious. Why was the Earth magnetic? Why did its field drift over time? Why did some places cause the needle to waver? These questions haunted the early scientists. They had traded angels for atoms, but the wonder persisted. In laboratories lit by candles and reason, the needle still turned. The compass also became a symbol of human ambition. Enlightenment thinkers embraced it as a metaphor for the mind's ability to find truth amid confusion. Just as the needle found north, so too could reason find certainty. The compass appeared on bookplates, in emblems of scientific societies, and on the covers of philosophical treatises. Voltaire wrote of it admiringly. Diderot included entries on magnetism and navigation in his Picture. It was not worshipped, but it was respected. Educational reformers seized upon it as a teaching aid. Boys in grammar schools were shown how to magnetize needles with lodestones, how to suspend them on cork, how to read a compass rose. They were taught that this device, so small and plain, had changed the world. In one widely circulated textbook, the compass was described as the proof that the earth speaks, and in this way, the Enlightenment did not silence the compass, it gave it a new voice. But the transition was not seamless. Many clung to the older meanings. Sailors still crossed themselves before consulting it. Some continued to attribute its failure to spiritual causes. A storm that shook the needle was said to be divine warning. A compass that spun in circles might still cause a voyage to be postponed. Superstition died slowly, even under the lamp of reason, and artists, poets, and mystics did not surrender it so easily. William Blake, who distrusted the cold geometry of the Enlightenment, imagined the compass as a symbol of divine constraint. In his painting The Ancient of Days, God leans down with a golden compass, measuring the void. It is a chilling image, beautiful and terrible, a fusion of creation and control. For Blake, the compass was not just science, it was judgment. Romantics would later reclaim the compass from the hands of reason. To them, it was the perfect emblem of man's loneliness, pointing, always pointing, yet never arriving, a symbol not of certainty, but of eternal seeking. In travelogues and novels, it became a token of longing again. A man in the wilderness, with only his compass and his memories. A woman waiting at a window, the needle on her desk pointing to a place she would never see. So even as science explained the compass, it could not erase its resonance. It had become too embedded in the human story. It was not just the triumph of inquiry, it was the echo of centuries, of prayers spoken in storm, of love letters sent across mountains, of alchemists whispering over bubbling flasks, of saints and sinners, knights and kings, all staring at the same small turning sliver of iron and wondering, what moves you? In the end, the Enlightenment did not extinguish the compass's mystery. It merely changed the shape of that mystery. It taught us how the needle turns, but not why we continue to follow it. Not why, even now, with satellites above and GPS in our pockets, the sight of a compass still catches our breath, still feels ancient, still feels like guidance. Because some part of us still longs to believe that when the needle settles, something more than physics has spoken, that it doesn't just point north, it points home. In drawing rooms and study chambers of the 18th century, amid growing collections of maps and curiosities, a new kind of object began to appear. A compass not built for travel, but for remembrance. These were not rugged mariners' tools, nor the brass-faced instruments of Enlightenment expeditions. These were ornamental, personal, fragile things satin-lined, pearl-inlaid, and often never used to chart a single mile. They were heirlooms of memory, and in this quiet evolution, the compass became something else. A relic, not of religion, not of science, but of sentiment. The compass had found a place in the hearts of those who did not seek direction in geography, but in time. Morning culture in the 18th and 19th centuries was elaborate. Lockets with hair, rings inscribed with names and dates, portraits of the deceased in miniature frames. Among these mementos, the compass emerged as an object uniquely suited to encapsulate grief, a needle that always points in one direction, a symbol of constancy amid loss, a token that suggests, however quietly, that the soul of the departed still guides. Some were crafted with the initials of the dead etched onto the lid. Others had poems folded beneath the base. Though you were gone, the needle turns to where you were. In certain circles, particularly among the Romantics, this practice became almost ritualistic. Widows would wear compasses as brooches or sew them into the linings of cloaks. A compass might be buried with a letter or placed on a gravestone, its lid left open, rain pooling in the basin where the needle once turned. In London, an entire cabinet in the Ashmolean was once devoted to instruments of farewell. More than half were compasses, some with broken needles, some deliberately magnetized to point not north, but toward the home or place of death. This was not just eccentricity, it was belief made private. The Enlightenment had explained the mechanism, but it had not quieted the ache. The compass, disenchanted by science, found refuge in mourning. It became a metaphor again, but a quieter one, no longer proclaiming divine order, no longer promising salvation, simply saying, I remember, I return, I remain turned to you. Writers seized on this image. In the novels of the period, a compass might appear on a mantle, ticking faintly in the night. In one tale, a soldier returns from war to find his beloved gone, and her compass left behind its needle stuck, unmoving, as though frozen by sorrow. In another, a dying woman gives her lover a compass and says only, if you are lost, follow this. It knows where I am. These were not tales of travel. They were tales of permanence, of a needle that turns not for navigation, but for devotion. Artists followed suit. Romantic painters often included compasses in their depictions of separation or yearning. A traveler seated at a crossroads, compass in hand, face turned toward a rising moon. A widow gazing out to sea, her child asleep beside a compass laid on the sill. Even funerary sculpture embraced the symbol. In several cemeteries across Europe, one finds carved compasses atop headstones, needles forever aligned, encircled by wreaths of stone ivy or weeping angels. But perhaps the most poignant use came in personal letters. Soldiers wrote home of how they kept a compass beside their cot. Parents mailed them to sons heading west or across oceans. Lovers exchanged them with vows never to be misled. The needle became a way of saying, I am with you, even in my absence. The moment it moved, the heart responded, and when it did not, in this role, the compass crossed boundaries. It belonged to no single class, no single creed. It could sit on a general's desk or hang from a shepherd's neck. It spoke a language anyone grieving could understand, and it required no maintenance, no ritual, only that one believe, in some small way, that direction still mattered, that the place someone once stood, the space they left behind, still exerted a pull. Eventually, this era passed. The Industrial Revolution replaced sentiment with steam. Mourning culture faded into efficiency. Compasses became standardized, mass-produced, packed with instructions and warranties. But here and there, even into the early 20th century, these sentimental compasses persisted, kept in drawers, tucked in family Bibles, stitched into wedding gowns, or buried in fields where no one walked anymore. And so the compass became not only a guide for those in motion, but a companion for those left still. A way to hold a line, toward memory, to feel, even when everything else had gone, that something in the world still turned because of love, because of loss, because something once mattered and still did. In that quiet turning, the compass spoke not with direction, but with devotion, not with answers, but with the soft certainty that some things remain fixed, that grief, too, has a polarity, and that memory, like a needle, always points true. In the smoky parlors of the early 20th century, as maps were redrawn by war and the frontiers of science pushed into the atom and the cosmos, the compass became both obsolete and sacred. Wireless radios whispered across oceans. Gyroscopes began replacing needles in ships and aircraft. Global positioning, though not yet digital, had begun to rely more on triangulated signals and less on trembling iron. The compass, once the crown jewel of direction, was being gently retired from its throne. But it did not vanish. It lingered in drawers, hung on belts, sat quietly in museum cases, and, in so doing, it became something else entirely. The compass became a symbol of orientation in a disoriented world. Soldiers in the trenches of World War I were still issued compasses, sturdy, brass-cased models with lids that snapped shut like secrets. In a war where direction often meant survival, the compass returned to its primal purpose. Yet soldiers didn't only consult it to find trenches or rally points. Many came to see it as a kind of talisman, a grounding object in a war defined by chaos, gas, and noise. Letters from the front describe men staring at the needle during bombardments, not to chart a course, but to remind themselves that North still existed, that there was still a world beyond wire and mud, that orientation, if not salvation, was still possible. After the war, in the interwar years and into World War II, compasses remained part of standard military kits. They were stitched into pilot uniforms, hidden in escape pouches, sealed in survival kits dropped behind enemy lines. Intelligence agencies embedded micro-compasses into buttons and belt buckles. One British-issued compass for downed airmen was no larger than a fingernail, disguised as a shirt stud. In these forms, the compass was no longer just a navigational device, it was a lifeline, a way to find home when all else was lost. But beyond war, in the literature and art of the 20th century, the compass began to shift. No longer a scientific marvel or sacred relic, it became an existential question. In novels by Kafka and Camus, orientation was not about geography, but identity. Who am I? Where am I going? What does North even mean in a world without certainty? One modernist poet wrote, "The compass spins because the world no longer believes in it." Another answered, "It spins because we forgot how to be still." In this age, the compass was often portrayed as broken not in body, but in meaning. Films showed lost men tapping at inert needles. Painters depicted compasses rusted or buried. And yet, the image endured. It appeared on book covers, album sleeves, protest posters. It became a shorthand for lostness, for longing, for the search for truth in an age of ambiguity. To wear a compass pendant in 1960 was to say, "I'm looking." To carry one in 1980 was to ask, does direction still matter? Surprisingly, the compass found new life in the countercultures of the late 20th century. Hikers, backpackers, and environmentalists embraced it as a symbol of analog purity in a digitalizing world. In a landscape now governed by satellites and coordinates, the act of holding a compass, of reading a map by hand, of aligning oneself with the Earth's invisible field became an act of resistance, a rejection of algorithmic dependence, a return to the body, to the hand, to the turning of the needle. Even in psychotherapy, the compass took on new meaning. It was used as a metaphor in healing, in self-discovery. Patients were asked to find their true north, to calibrate their internal compass. The language of direction re-entered the mind, not as geography, but as metaphor for moral clarity, for psychological integrity. In some clinics, small wooden compasses were given to patients as tactile reminders. You are not lost. You are still moving. You still know how to turn. In religious discourse, too, the compass reappeared, not as doctrine, but as symbol. Sermons used it to speak of God's constancy. Meditation teachers spoke of centering, like the compass needle always moving, but always returning. Some churches placed compasses in their architecture, quietly embedded in floors or pews, like whispered prayers in iron. And then came the digital age. Smartphones arrived with built-in compasses. Apps simulated needle turns. The magnetic field of the Earth, once a mystery, became another sensor to calibrate. And yet, even here, the old metaphor remained. People still spoke of finding their bearings, still called others their true north, still felt a quiet thrill watching a needle settle, even when it was rendered by pixels and code. The compass had outlived its era. It had survived being sacred, being scientific, being sentimental. It had become myth, again not because it was misunderstood, but because it was understood too well. The mystery was not in how it worked, but in what it continued to mean. It had become a mirror of faith, of longing, of the human need to know where we are and where we are going. And so, even as GPS satellites blink silently in orbit, even as maps speak aloud from screens, the compass remains. It lives in drawers, in poems, in dreams. A device that does not speak, but points, that does not answer, but suggests. A needle that turns not only to north, but to memory, to hope, to home. A thing that spins and still, after all these centuries, somehow helps us be still. In the early 21st century, when location could be summoned in a blink, and digital maps whispered directions with machine-perfect clarity, the compass remained tucked in emergency kits, engraved into watches, mounted on dashboards, embedded invisibly in every smartphone. But by then, the compass had already completed its journey through function. It no longer existed because we needed it. It existed because we remembered needing it. Because even in a world of omnipresent positioning, there was something quietly sacred about a device that pointed, simply, silently, without asking for signal or battery or explanation. In a century of noise, the compass endured as an icon of stillness. It was no longer consulted, it was contemplated. Hikers brought them not out of necessity, but reverence. Children learned about them not for survival, but for metaphor. They spun them on desks and watched the needle settle, like watching a secret made visible. It always finds north, teachers would say, and the children would nod, though most of them would never need it to. Still, the lesson stuck. That direction is real and findable, and not always obvious. The compass, long divorced from practical reliance, found a new life in design. It appeared on tattoos as a symbol of resilience or adventure. It hung from necklaces, etched with initials. It was printed on the covers of journals, embossed into graduation gifts, stitched into the leather of travel bags. These were not acts of navigation, they were gestures of orientation, the compass said. I have a direction, or I am trying to find one. In popular culture, the compass re-emerged as a totem in stories of journey and growth. In novels, a character would inherit a compass from a lost parent. In films, it would be the object that guided the hero through doubt. In games, it marked the edge of the known world. It was rarely used for its original purpose, but it was always there in the pocket, on the map, at the moment of decision. When a character was lost, they held the compass. When they found themselves, it settled. Spiritual thinkers began to reclaim the compass. In a time when the external world could be charted in perfect clarity, the internal world remained murky. The metaphor proved irresistible. Life coaches, pastors, therapists, all spoke of recalibrating the compass. People were told to trust their inner needle, to follow their North Star. The language was old, but the ache was current. In a world that could show you where you were at all times, it could still be difficult to know where you were meant to go. Some retreat centers began including compasses in their welcome kits, simple ones, no bigger than a coin, accompanied by blank journals. You won't need it. One welcome note, read, but we hope you'll carry it. The idea was not to navigate outwardly, but to remember the possibility of orientation, to walk into the forest and know that direction, even if forgotten, is never lost. Digital developers, too, found themselves haunted by the image. A few created virtual compasses that didn't point north, but toward goals, or loved ones, or places marked home. These apps rarely caught on, but the fact that they existed spoke volumes. In an age obsessed with optimization, the compass remained stubbornly analog. It refused to offer speed, precision, or updates. It simply turned, and when crises came, natural disasters, power failures, times when the GPS went silent, the compass returned, humbly, without flourish. It was there in survival manuals, on rescue teams' belts, in the hands of scouts and soldiers. In these moments, people remembered what it meant to rely on something that didn't need permission to work, that wasn't networked, that answered no one. The compass never asked where you were. It simply told you where to face. In the end, the compass became a relic, not of navigation, but of belief. Not belief in magnetism weed, long since proven that, but belief in direction itself, in the idea that the world could still offer guidance, that amid noise and movement, there existed a force that remained steady. The compass did not evolve, it did not adapt, it did not compete with technology. It endured precisely because it refused to. And so today, when someone holds a compass in their palm reel, or metaphorical, they are holding more than a tool. They are holding history, pilgrimages and prayers, storms and poems, love letters and battlefields. They are holding the trembling certainty of 1,000 generations who, in moments of fear or hope or longing, looked down and watched a small needle settle, and believed that, somehow, in its simple turning, they too might find their way. There is something paradoxical about the compass's final form, an object, now almost entirely unnecessary, yet more evocative than ever. In the modern museum, it sits beneath glass, with quiet dignity, labeled and dated, often placed beside sextants, charts, and dusty nautical logs. Children walk past it, tapping screens, looking for the interactive exhibit. Adults pause longer, eyes narrowing, remembering something they never quite used, but always understood. For centuries, the compass had been alive, pointing, trembling, drawing invisible lines across oceans and poems. Now it rests, but in that rest, it has not lost its power. It has become myth. The compass today belongs more to ritual than routine. It is gifted at turning points, graduations, retirements, weddings, funerals. It is engraved with initials, tucked into velvet boxes, presented with speeches about journey and purpose. Rarely, if ever, is it consulted. But that is not the point. It is not meant to be used. It is meant to mean, it is meant to say, without words, find your way. And when you do, trust it. In certain modern traditions, the compass has even taken on ceremonial weight. Some families give them at coming-of-age celebrations, symbolizing the right to choose one's own path. In leadership retreats and corporate rituals, a compass might be passed hand to hand in silence, each participant pausing with it in their palm before passing it along. It becomes a secular sacramental totem of intention. It is not that people believe the needle imparts wisdom. It's that they believe in the act of holding something that remembers wisdom. The compass has also become a recurring image in the language of purpose. Political speeches speak of a moral compass as a sign of integrity. Teachers ask students to stay true to their internal compass when facing difficult choices. Even in the digital world, where algorithms track our every move, we speak of needing to recenter, to orient, to realign. These are compass words, pulled forward from centuries of direction seeking, now embedded in psychology, ethics, and self-help literature. We speak as if we are still holding the needle, even when we are holding nothing at all. Artists and storytellers continue to breathe life into its old metaphor. In fiction, when a character is truly lost, emotionally, morally, spiritual lost, is not a map they reach for. It is a compass, one that may be broken, one that may have belonged to a father, a lover, a fallen friend. The compass becomes the proxy for the story's spine, the turning point, the reorientation, the unspoken admission that we need to believe there is something to turn toward, something steady, something north. And then, in the quietest spaces in therapy, in meditation, in grief, the compass returns again. Not physically, but symbolically. Patients speak of spinning inside, of not knowing where they are. And the answer offered is not GPS. It is pause, breath, alignment. The image of the compass is suggested as a visual anchor. Imagine a needle. A counselor might say, let it settle. That image, grounded in centuries of sacred, scientific, and sentimental turning, becomes a psychological lifeline. In this way, the compass has achieved what few tools ever do. It has transcended its utility. The axe, the plow, the telescope each changed the world, then faded into their replacements. But the compass, though replaced, has not disappeared. It has not become obsolete. It has become archetype. It now resides in the collective unconscious's symbol of direction in every form. It speaks across languages and cultures. A simple, silent object that doesn't explain but reminds. And perhaps that is its final lesson. That direction is not always something we calculate. That not all journeys begin with coordinates. That long before the route appears, there must be an impulse, a turn, a point of stillness, a trembling of metal that says, you are not lost, you are facing, because the compass, in the end, does not take us anywhere. It does not carry, pull, or push. It only waits. It only points. And in that pointing, offers the oldest and most human of promises, that there is a way, even when we cannot yet see it, that there is a path, even in the dark, that there is always a north. Beneath it, all beneath the myths, the sermons, the voyages, the griefs, And the countless turning hands, there lies a deeper story the compass has always told, though it never speaks. It is the story of stillness, of the moment just before movement, of the breath before a step. The compass is not about travel. It is about readiness. And in its long life, it has taught us again and again that orientation is not first a matter of location, but of attention, of attunement. That before we go anywhere, we must know how to be. It is the paradox at the heart of the compass. It moves, but it never departs. The needle's trembling has long mirrored the human heart. We shake, we hesitate, we drift, but always we return, pulled by something unseen. In the compass, humanity found not just a way to cross land and sea, but a companion to that deeper, more uncertain crossing, the one inward. When saints held it, they read it as grace. When scholars measured it, they saw the earth's breadth. When lovers exchanged it, they trusted its fidelity. And when the lost held it, even without knowing how to read it, they believed, faintly, stubbornly, that it would lead them home. This is why, even now, a compass placed in the palm awakens something ancient, something wordless. You feel its weight, its symmetry. You watch the needle quiver and settle. You don't need to ask what it means. You already know. It is the same knowledge that made a monk bow over it in candlelight, that led a sailor to whisper to it in the fog, that caused a poet to write, "I follow where it points, though it names no place." It is not a tool, it is a mirror, and in that mirror we glimpse a truth we keep forgetting, that direction is not a matter of certainty, but of courage. We live in an age of constant reorientation. The world spins faster now, or so it seems. Information floods, certainties crumble, identity shifts, and amid it all, the compass remains less visible perhaps, but more vital than ever. In times of noise, we reach for what is silent. In times of doubt, we look for what points. The compass offers no answers, only alignment, but that is often enough. That is sometimes everything. It has been carried by conquerors and pilgrims, by mystics and mariners, by children and soldiers. It has crossed deserts and oceans and centuries, and through it all, it has never changed. A needle, a point, a silent pull. In its refusal to evolve, the compass has become the most enduring kind of teacher, the one who never interrupts, who never insists, but who is always there when you turn toward it, waiting, steady, true. And so it is fitting that we end not with a bang, but with a stillness, not with a destination, but with the needle at rest. A final moment before the next step, a pause in the story, not because it is finished, but because it is always beginning again. Somewhere, someone is holding a compass right now. Maybe they are on a trail, or in a dark room, or in the middle of a question they cannot yet name. They look down, the needle trembles, it turns, it finds, and they breathe. This is the gift of the compass. Not that it takes us somewhere, but that it reminds us we are always already on the way. That no matter how lost we feel, there is something in us that can turn, that can listen, that can align. And in that quiet turning, hear the whisper, go. 1,000 years from now, long after digital maps have dissolved into the architecture of thought, long after Earth's magnetic field has perhaps shifted or waned, and after steel ships have given way to silent craft among the stars, the compass may still endure, not as a functioning device, perhaps, but as a relic, an echo, an idea, a fossil of faith in the existence of orientation. Even if no one remembers which way north was, the image of the compass, a circle, a needle, a center, will still hold its charge. Because every age, no matter how advanced, will need something to point beyond the immediate, something to quiet the chaos, something to trust. It may be carved into stone on some Martian outpost, a decorative nod to earthbound navigation. Or it may be discovered by archaeologists of the far future who hold it in gloved hands and wonder what it measured: wind, sound, time. They may debate its use, hypothesize rituals around it, just as we once puzzled over the Antikythera mechanism or the stone discs of the Han dynasty. They may never guess it was something so simple, so profound, an instrument that did not measure the world but pointed through it. For even then, the need to orient will not have passed. It is older than cities, older than compasses, older than language. It is the soft ache in the chest that asks not "where am I?" but "which way should I go?" A machine may plot your location with perfect accuracy, may chart every path, simulate every option, but it cannot feel what you feel when you look down and see a single line, quivering gently, pointing silently, suggesting that amid the infinite, something remains steady. And perhaps, by then, the compass will no longer be a physical object at all. Perhaps it will live in language, in metaphor, in the myths of the New World. Perhaps it will become a symbol taught to children on distant moons, a fable passed down not because it worked, but because it meant. They will be told that long ago people followed needles that moved on their own, that these needles knew the way, or at least reminded people that a way could be found, that the needle never spoke but always pointed, that it required trust, not understanding, just trust. In this imagined future, someone may still close their eyes and feel it, a pull, a tilt, a sensation that one direction among all others matters, that a decision made in silence can carry the weight of a journey, that turning, even without walking, is a kind of motion, that finding your bearings is a sacred act, and that, perhaps, is the compass's final role, not as navigator, but as anchor, a symbol that reminds us, across time and language and technology, that the world is vast, but not void, that direction, even if it changes, even if it eludes explanation, exists, that within us, always, there is a needle uncalibrated, trembling, true. So let the future come. Let the stars shift. Let the fields decay and the satellites rise. The compass will remain, in form or in story, in iron or in metaphor, in hands or in hearts, because what it teaches is not mechanical. It is moral, poetic, enduring, a lesson not in where we are, but in how to turn, in how to stand still long enough to hear the earth's oldest whisper say, once again, this way.